everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Money Matters. As you know by now, we are an interactive show that tries to educate our viewers on money-related matters. Do join us on our social media platforms using the hashtag MMOnSID. But today we are talking about something that is probably on your mind as well. And because I suppose we've seen how the repo rates have gone up, we've seen how interest rates have gone up, and it's just made us wonder, how is it possible that we can own properties? And so today we'll be talking about some of the ways that we can venture into in becoming property owners. And one of those ways is maybe becoming part of a joint bond, or being part of, or being one of the joint bond applicants. But helping me with this conversation is Lebogang. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, sir. And Lebogang Lebepe is indeed a CEO and founder of BizHouse. Tell us a bit more about yourself, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I am a founder and CEO of a company called BizHouse. It's a property development and investment company. I was born and bred in Tembisa. So in the property development space, we do rental stocks in and around townships mostly. And then we've got the development to sell that is for the lower LSM 10 that we do for sales.
Nice. I think that's quite an interesting space you find yourself in.
Thank you.
But today we're talking joint bonds, right? Joint bond applications. And perhaps, for someone who is not familiar with the term, how do we unpack a joint bond? What exactly in its simplest form are we talking about?
So we're talking about an application for a bond to the bank, of which it's a finance to finance a property by more than one applicant.
To how many?
So it depends on the bank itself. So it's people that come together to say, personally, on my individual capacity, I can't afford a 2 million rand bond. But if I partner with you and maybe 3 other people or 5 other people, then we can be able to use our affordability, because individually we probably don't afford the 2 million rand bond application because of our personal living expenses. So therefore, we're looking at our credit, also our credit profiles. If we can all qualify in terms of credit profiles, but then affordability is the issue between amongst ourselves. Then combined, we can be able to now go and do this joint application to the bank, and as a result, we are able to afford that particular property.
Do the parties that are coming together now for this joint application have to be in any way related?
No, they don't have to be anywhere in any way related. So they one can have their friends coming together to say, okay, let's have an agreement to say we're going to jointly do this particular application. They can be colleagues that are working together. They say, okay, personally or individually, we can't afford to have these other second bond. Maybe they've got a bond in their personal capacity as their primary home, so they can afford to go and get another bond. So in order for them to enable themselves to do so, they then partner up with other people, and then they come together, they go and do the joint application. So they don't have to necessarily be related in any way or form, as long as they are all in agreement, and they can all then jointly be liable for this particular bond and be able to pay for it and agree on how they're going to do so.
To do it. I'm just wondering, whether the sharing of the liability, right? Because obviously we're going into this and we're bonding this, whatever it is that we're bonding together.
Correct.
And will the sharing of the liability be equal in that, or can we, are the structures a bit nuanced that we can actually structure it differently with the bank? How flexible are banks, around such things?
All right. So banks looks at remember when you loan money as a bond from the bank,
Yeah.
it's a loan against your income and your credit profile. So
Yeah.
they first look at your credit profile and then they look at your income.
Yeah.
So they would most likely going to put those that have got more income or that have got more affordability as top of the priority, and they can then amongst the group, then you can then agree as to how you proportion the bond itself, the liability of that particular bond. So you can agree to do it equally. You can agree to do it in percentage, depending on what you guys can afford and what the bank says you can afford.
So jointly.
Correct.
But I suppose from a bank's perspective, that liability is shared equally amongst the applicants.
It's not all the time that it's shared equally. So it can be proportioned according to what
you've agreed.
what you've agreed,
Yeah.
and also how the bank says you guys can afford the affordability in terms of the assessment that the bank will do based on your credit profiles and based on your credit history or credit behavior of each individual that is within that particular group. And also amongst what now the affordability of each individual is in proportion to the loan amount that you are requesting from the bank, and then they can then apportion that way.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about the fact that they look at these other things, but how important is it then that I suppose not only for the bank, right, or the individuals, but us that are actually forming part of this joint application, why is it so important that we ought to understand each other's credit profiles or credit scores?
So when it comes to credit profile, so if you've got a joint bond with someone, with your friend or with your partner or with a colleague or with a member of your family or whatever the case is, right? So if they default on their part, that also automatically affects you. So you need to be very careful as to the people that you get into a joint bond with or a joint liability with, because you're both equally liable for this particular debt. If the partner that you've went into a joint bond with ceases to pay, then that liability reflects back a bet on your credit profile as well. So automatically, their behavior or their credit behavior has a direct impact into your credit profile as well, because you are jointly liable for this particular bond. So meaning that if you continue paying your part, but then the other party doesn't continue to honor their financial obligation towards this particular bond, then it equally affects you as it affects their credit profile as well.
So let's take it a step back, right? Because you've mentioned something quite critical and quite important, and sometimes we're oblivious to this point, right? And how if I'm entering into a joint bond application, that I'm actually equally, liable or responsible, or actually I might be affected,
correct,
by the behavior of the other party or parties that I'm coming together with into this application.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that before we actually even consider, bonding, jointly, or what are some of the things that us as individuals ought to be asking each other, right? As we are coming into this whole arrangement, because it's quite important that there's transparency, I believe, right?
Correct.
And that we actually play our cards very openly, and that the next party understands exactly what my financial standing is. But what are some of the things that we need to make sure that we ask each other before coming together? Because we are forming this relationship, right?
100%.
That is tied to some debts. What are those questions?
Okay, so first and foremost, you need to look into each other's credit profile, credit history, to see what have been their behavior within the past 3 years, within the past 2 years, within the past 5 years.
Yeah.
'Cause, you need to look into whether they've got any judgments, whether they've got any blacklisting,
Yeah.
whether they've been paying their accounts, and what how have they been paying their accounts. That's the first thing. Look into that. Secondly, you need to look into in their affordability as well, to see if they can afford to actually take on a new debt. And then thirdly, you need to look into how they are married, because that has an implication into your a joint bond, or into your credit. Because now, let's say, for instance, if the other person is married in community of property, and God forbids, and they decide to divorce, so you must know that asset is, their portion of that asset is 50% belonging to the other party. So the other party has got that claim into that. And if that person is married in community of property, if their partner behaves badly in terms of their credit ruins their credit profile, so automatically your partner is also, their credit profile is also ruined, because they are viewed as one person. Then it also somehow affects your credit accessibility as well, as a joint partner into the bond itself.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something quite critical, right? Because sometimes we miss some of the conditions, right? Or some of the things that actually come with being married in community of property.
100%.
That is also, I suppose, you can't get into that joint application without your partner actually endorsing
Correct.
that application, or you getting into that application, which is quite critical. But I think maybe let's just pause it there for now, and then we'll come back and just unpack a bit further around, and maybe just looking at married couples, right, getting into like joint applications and what that means for them. But I think for you, our viewers at home, do continue engaging with us. I know for sure that you do have questions around this topic. So do ask those questions, share your thoughts and views with us using the hashtag MM on SIG on all our social media platforms. But for now, I'll see you just after this. Welcome back to Money Matters. We are talking joint bond applications, what I need to be aware of before I enter into that arrangement with either my significant other or any person that I wish to enter into this arrangement with. But helping me unpack on this topic, yes, it is Lebogang Lebebe, and he is joining us in studio. And he was actually, before the ad break, we were just talking about when I enter into this arrangement, right, with my significant other, what are some of the things that we, especially if we are married in community of property, and I suppose if we are buying a property, we'll buy it together, right?
Correct.
What are some of the things that we ought to just go into eyes wide open? What are those things that we need to be looking out for?
So when you are married in community of property, unfortunately, whether you're doing the application alone, you already joined
Bonding,
yeah. So it's already a joint application. So you're already, so everything that you do when it comes to credit assets, you're viewed as one, because you're married in community of property. By the minute you sign your marriage certificate and you say, I'm marrying you in community of property, you're already saying, I'm losing my individuality and I'm now being joined together to be one with you. So everything that you do, you are viewed as one. So whether you do an application, you can't do a bond application without the other person signing that particular bond application. When you default in your bond application, in your bond credit line, or whether your credit line or your credit card or your car or your clothing account or whatever the case is, the other person is already affected in terms of that. Whether you've got debts that you accumulated 15 years ago that are still pending in your credit profile, the minute you sign that, when they do the other party does the credit application, unfortunately, it also reflects on their part, because now what you've done is that you've taken your individual credit profiles and you've married them together.
So you merge them though?
Not necessarily match them, but that's how the credit houses view you. So you're no longer an individual when you marry in community of property. So
for the funder.
Yes, from the funder's perspective, you are now one. So you can't. So when you do an application, your spouse is also looked into. So automatically your credit profiles have meshed.
Yeah. Okay, we're still individuals that they look into him.
Yes, correct. So you still, when you do an application, you can't do an application alone because you are married in community of property. So that other person needs to be there. So therefore, automatically you are doing a joint application.
Yeah. And I think what I wanted to clarify though is that when I go to say do Experian or any of the credit reporting sites or tools, is that I should still see my own name appearing there. But what you're saying is that when the funder is looking at my profile, they'll also zap into my partner's profile, whether or not we are actually saying we are coming into this jointly, but they'll also just automatically just have to look into it because we are married in community of property.
Correct. And you cannot do an application
without the partner knowing.
Without the partner signing and
saying go ahead
application with you.
Yeah.
Basically, you can't sign alone. So it's like you are now reverted back to becoming a minor.
You're joined to the hip. You're joined to
a minor. So now your guardian must co-sign with you every time when you do an application. So it's exactly the same.
Yeah. I want to move away from married spouses or couple. And perhaps let's just look at some of the pros and cons, right? And I think we've unpacked some of those. But what are the pros and cons of co-ownership, right? So as we are making this decision that we want to enter into this arrangement together, what are some of the key things that we need to look at beforehand?
Okay. So let's look at the pros first, right? So firstly, that means that if your credit, if you don't have more credit accessibility individually, so then by bringing the other person in, then you are able to now access more credit. And then in terms of affordability, instead of you, facing this giant debt of 50,000 rand per month alone, so you've got the other person or the other people that you can share that with you. So it's shared responsibility, and it's also shared
risk here,
because now you're no longer taking on this particular risk alone, and you've got other people that are able to support you. And it's always been said that two minds are better than one. So you can be able to structure your finances better because you now have other people to actually bounce off ideas around. And then also you have other people that you can make decisions with. So you don't necessarily have to make decisions all by yourself all the time. So you can even share the responsibility to say, no, you deal with these particular decisions regarding this particular credit. You deal with these decisions. So it's shared responsibility, shared financial burden, shared risk, affordability. You instead of spending all your all your credit
whatever capacity you had.
Yes. So now you've reduced the capacity that you've now used up for this particular one. So now you still have got some other capacity to still do other things because of the shared responsibility.
Do banks look at it that way though? So for example, we have come together, correct, or maybe 3 of us have come together and we enter into this joint application.
Yes.
Right. When for example, I've got, say we are bonding maybe property with 1.5 million, and I then want to go buy a car. Does the bank, because I suppose in the cons that we haven't really spoken about is the fact that the shared risk can also be like a double-edged sword, right? In a sense that where you mess up, you mess
Absolutely.
up all of us.
Correct.
Right.
So those are the cons that you also have, because if you mess up paying off and you default on the credit, on this joint credit,
Yeah.
you're also affecting the rest of the people. Correct.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things. But now, when the banks looks at from the pros side, when the banks looks at your application, the shared risk, it is looked at as a shared risk, because now when they look at your affordability, they're saying, okay, out of the 1.5 million rent house that you guys have jointly applied for, your portion is maybe 5,000 rand instead of 15,000 rand.
Yeah.
So now, from your affordability calculation, they only cater for 5,000 rand instead of 15,000.
When I do something else, when I
other application for a car, for instance. So that's one of the pros. Then when you're looking at the cons themselves, then if the other person messes up, it messes up the credit of the other two, because now you've defaulted on this particular bond. You're not saying that party 3 has defaulted, therefore party 2 and party 1, they are good to go, because now you are jointly liable.
Yeah.
So meaning that if the third party decides not to pay, you guys must be in a position to actually chip in and close up that gap for you to keep up that good credit.
Because I was about to get to that there are certain, eventualities that we ought to prepare for. For example, you might lose your employment and things like that. And how do we make sure that as the joint parties in this relationship or arrangement, make sure that we pull resources together to be able to account, and to close the gap that you were talking to? Are these things that we ought to plan for before getting into, this arrangement? Because these are things that do unfortunately happen nowadays.
Absolutely. So before you actually are getting to a joint application, so you need to discuss with your joint applicant to say what happens in the case where one of us loses their job, What happens in the case where one of us defaults from paying? What happens if one of us passes on? Things like wills should be in place. Things like succession plan should be in place. Things like how are you going to know? The first thing first is the question is this joint application of this bond, this property that you guys are buying. What is it for? What's the purpose of this particular property? And once you then started paying off this particular property, who's going to take ownership of it ultimately, and how are we going to then share this asset? How are we using this asset to benefit all of us, amongst us? How are we, when I pass on, how do I make sure that my family still continues to benefit from it, or my beneficiaries still continue to benefit from this particular asset? Or how am I being bought out of this? What's the exit strategy on this particular asset, so that when the unfortunate happens, you guys know exactly what you need to do in terms of this particular property. Are you guys buying this one out? Are you guys continuing paying off? Are you taking an insurance against each party that is involved? Things like that. Those are things that you discuss prior to you going into a joint point, and then we were able to plan properly.
Plan ahead.
Yes, plan ahead.
Yeah, I suppose, those are critical and crucial conversations that ought to be had. But I suppose in the heat of the moment, when we are so convinced that, we want to get into this and we're going to do it, it's as if, people forget about some of these things and we don't plan for the eventualities. But I think what I'm gathering is that it's also quite as important that even before entering into an arrangement, that we really understand what we're getting ourselves into, and what are some of the things that can trip us up along the way so that we are well prepared for those eventualities should they happen and when they do come about.
There's a saying that says that failing to plan is planning to fail. So if you don't plan ahead, you're planning to actually fail. So failure becomes inevitable. So one needs to plan ahead and make sure that they are prepared for the journey.
Exactly. That we are prepared for a journey. And it is quite a long journey, right? If we are bonded, it's going to be a very long journey, but we need to make sure that we put in place measures that will make sure that it's a smooth journey along the way. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, for sharing actually your knowledge with our viewers and with us, and for making sure that we actually educate one another around this topic of joint co-applicants or joint applications or joint bonds, as you call it. But thank you so much for having us, for joining us in studio rather. Look, I'm now turning you into the host. But thank you so much, Lebogang, and may you continue being blessed in the line of work that you have chosen to do. And there you have it, our viewers at home. We were discussing joint applications, as you've heard from the horse's mouth himself, CEO of BizHouse. I think I got that right, BizHouse. Is that we ought to be very prepared as we get into these arrangements. So make sure that you really understand the arrangement that you are getting yourself into and that you are well prepared for it. Research, and I cannot emphasize that a bit more. But don't forget you're part of this conversation as well as we ended off. Now you are still at liberty to continue conversing with us on our social media platforms using the hashtag MM on SID. But for today, this is the end of our show. And from me, Joy Malite, and the rest of the Money Matters team, it is goodbye and God bless.